Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dice Towers Daily Chat. I am Eric Summerer, and my guest tonight is a famous designer, and is now made a big splash in the last couple of weeks, being announced the new director of game development at Stronghold Games, but has been working with indie studios for several years now. It's Cindy Engelstein. Hello, Sydney. How are you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing splendidly. Folks, thank you for joining us in the chat. If there's anything that you want to ask of Sydney or myself, get those questions in. But we're going to chat for a little bit first, because it's been a while since I had a chance to talk to you, Sydney.
Yeah, we used to, actually know each other way back in the day before either of us were famous.
Way back in the day. Do you remember what the first game we ever played in person was?
I definitely remember playing Libertalia, but I don't know if that was the first one.
No, that wasn't the first one. So it was Origins, many years ago. I want to say
I was 10 at that Origins, so it was 12 years ago?
It was 2009, I think.
14 years ago? 14 years ago?
I don't think it was that far. This was
a long time.
This was '09, and we played. It was the storytelling game Tales of the Arabian Nights. And it was brand new at that Origins, and you had the brand new copy, and we were all telling crazy stories to each other and having a blast while doing so.
I do remember that. I remember that because it was so exciting that it had first came out. I'd never played a game like that before.
Yes, it was just a fascinating experience, and had a great time as well. But now you are just recently the director of game development at Stronghold. And I wanted to ask you right off the bat, what does that mean? For one thing, that's a very fancy title.
Yes.
But you've also been doing game development work for a while now with the larger indie game studios. And I thought maybe we could start with what you've been doing, and now what you are transitioning into doing with this new role at Stronghold.
Yeah. So. There's not that many of us sort of behind the scenes at indie game studios. Like, our core staff is only like 5 or 6 people. So everybody kind of wears a lot of hats. And up until now, I've done pretty much everything that a board game needs before you actually manufacture it. So I did a lot of meeting with people at conventions and playing prototypes and seeing if they were things we were interested in signing on. I also got to do some original design with the company on our ongoing project lines. So like Aeon's End had already had 3 of the games in the Aeon's End series had come out before I was hired on. So we know we wanted to keep coming out with those. So I joined onto the design team for the next ones and got to have a big hand in the design of those. And then for those games and also the games we signed from independent designers, doing development work, tightening them up, making sure they'll really appeal to our customers, the types of gamers who like to play our sorts of games. And then some of the games I would also project manage. So I would do all the boring spreadsheet work of figuring out all the components and organizing what art assets we needed and working with illustrators and writing the rule books. And then all the front end stuff of marketing, I wasn't really involved in up until this point. I just did all the back end on making sure the game was fun and pretty and came together in time to be released.
So you were doing 5 out of the 6 things, and now you're adding the 6th thing? Is that what you're saying?
Kind of, yeah. So now I'm definitely going to be taking more of a front seat in terms of community engagement and stuff like this, because Stephen Bonacore, is such a personality, and he was such a great boon to the company that he knew everyone, and he could come and do good talks and be on panels at conventions. And we didn't really have someone in our company who, was in a similar position. So I'm kind of stepping up and going to get to do that and represent the company. And since I do so much work on the back end with all of our games, I already have a good primer of understanding our catalog and what's great about it, and I've played most of the games, somewhere close to 50 times because I have to play them over and over again to make sure they're fun. And so I feel equipped to talk about them.
Good. That's actually one of the questions that has come up in the chat already. Steve says, "How does it feel taking over Steven's old job?" And sort of expanding on that, you mentioned how he has been traditionally like almost a personality,
Yeah.
or a figurehead of. I'm sure he did things too, but a functional figurehead of the company. Are you planning to take on all of that, or are you? I mean, less excited about being the front person or the figurehead.
I mean, I don't think I can do it the way Bonacor used to do it because nobody could do it the way Bonacor did it. And it will definitely be different because I'm still relatively new to the industry, even though I feel like I've been involved in it for a really long time and I have a lot of friends. It's still not quite the same as the relationships that he had. So I don't know if I'll be, everywhere that Bonacor was, but I don't know. I'm really looking forward to getting to have these opportunities that I never had before.
Yeah, no, I mean it's sort of a weird situation. I mean you are doing the job, and you're going to have. I have to wonder what your conventions are going to look like once conventions can start again. So that was actually one of my questions was what before conventions just stopped, what did a convention look like for you? Were you able to enjoy it through the lens of a consumer or a hobbyist, or were you fully booked with responsibilities of networking and playing prototypes and all of that?
Yeah, so it definitely depends on the convention. Some of them have a lot more people trying to book meetings with us. GenCon, Origins, I was pretty much booked solid, one meeting, and then that meeting would end, and I'd have another prototype meeting to sit in on and try another game. So my experience of getting to be in the hall and buy the things that I had been looking forward to buying was sort of before the doors opened. I would be like, okay, the booth's set up. I would run. I would buy before anyone got inside, and then I was there for the rest of the day. I imagine that now I'll have more responsibilities to do interviews or panels or those kinds of marketing things, in addition to still doing prototype meetings. So probably I'll be even more busy.
Do you get the chance to play, to do some off the clock playing and actually get to
Our company really loves playing Time's Up.
Okay.
So I like it for a convention game because after a full day of working at a convention, I'm not always in for the brain burner type games, the hardcore Euros, I just want something fun. So we play a lot of Time's Up, and that really makes a convention for me is when we get to do that.
All right. Kabuki Kid asks, how much do you see yourself still designing games in your new role?
I think I'll still be able to design games, especially, like I said, the games that are already part of our company's collection. I've had so much fun designing Aeon's End. It's one of my favorite games now, and it's not just the Stockholm Syndrome of the fact that I play it like 100 times a week. So I don't know about solo designs, independent outside the company, because I would definitely love to do that, and I'm able to do that, but after a full day of work where my actual job is designing board games, a lot of times that creative part of my brain is exhausted and I want to work on other non-board game designing things. But the fact that the company gives me so many opportunities to do design work is so fantastic, and I look forward to doing more of it. We've actually, this year, we have more in-house designed games than any other year. So I'm really getting to do more design and less project management of games that we picked up from external independent designers. It's been really awesome.
Excellent. Stick is asking, are you planning to be part of various gaming podcasts or even a regular on one? You just want to add one more role to all of the new job.
I don't know if I could be a regular on a podcast. But I definitely would be interested in being a guest on them more often. Sure,
Yeah,
if they want to have me.
awesome. So we mentioned how conventions are sort of off the table right now, and since that has been such a big part of your networking and scouting responsibilities, how do you do that part of your job now? How are you seeking new designs and developing those new designs when you can't have the face-to-face meetings?
Yeah, so both Stronghold Games and Indie Boards and Cards actually has an open submissions inbox for sell sheets for board game designs, and we get a ton of submissions through there, which means it is a little bit of a slow process to get through them. You know, it's not quite the same as sitting down with people and getting them to give you their game really fast, and then you can kind of get a real vibe of it. It's harder to do from sell sheets, but we definitely have found some interesting games through email submissions. And so that's another thing that I do in my job is I work through the email submission boxes and I try and see if there's anything we'd be interested in. And if there is, then the designer will send over a print and play or an actual prototype, and we'll be able to play it here with our team who are all in Indianapolis, and move forward from there.
So when these submissions come in, I'm curious, like how fine the filter is as you're looking at all of this. How
Like the filter before it gets to me.
when you look at this
Oh,
pile of
my.
submissions, what your filter is like? Are you looking at things that are maybe 75% close to what you would want to publish? Are you looking at higher than that? Are you looking for polished, fully polished, realized ideas, or just something that has a spark?
It's tricky because I would say most of the time we wouldn't really consider a game if it wasn't pretty much finished, almost entirely finished. Even if once we sign it, we end up making development changes anyway, we still are more interested in games that feel like they're pretty much ready to go into production. But, you know, sometimes the game, you know, it's less about how the game currently plays and more about how it feels like you could change it into playing if it's the sort of thing we're looking for.
Yeah.
But again, that's the kind of thing you can tell in a sit down meeting. It's a lot harder to tell in an email submission. So generally, if it's not something that already from the sell sheet I can tell that it's a pulled together game, it's much harder to get to that second step.
Yeah, it almost seems like you have to go back and forth maybe more to
Yeah,
get
and
to that
with
point.
the amount of submissions we get, it's you can't go back and forth with that many people. You know, it's sort of a if we get 100 emails, maybe one person has a game that we're interested in taking a look at, or two people have. It's really, really slim margins.
Okay. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when they come after you, when they submit a game that isn't ready, hasn't really reached that threshold, and you're just like, oh, I hate to just delete this, but this just isn't hitting the mark.
I think one of the biggest things for me, you know, that I can just, you know, take a paint with a large paintbrush across a lot of submissions that I get is just not doing the research on which publishing company you're submitting it to. You know, we don't so indie game studios really never produces two-player games, for instance. We don't produce like abstract strategy two-player games. And if you submit something like that, it could be the greatest game ever. We don't have the audience for it. We
Mm.
don't have the built-in marketing for it, you know. I'm sure there are companies out there who will. So if you design a great game, the next step is figuring out, you know, who will be able to use your game's potential and appreciate your game's potential and have the audience for that. Because even if it's really fun, if it's not an indie game or a Stronghold game, it's just not going to be something that we publish.
Gator Dave asks, do you feel more doors are opening for women in leadership positions in the industry?
I think so. And I think I don't know how much of it is the fact that more doors are opening versus the fact that more women are just feeling like they can get into the industry and get hired in any position in the industry. And then once they're there, obviously, they're all amazing and shine. And especially in such a small industry as board gaming is, every position has such a high responsibility and high leadership potential. Before I got this position as director, even my the position I was just hired on as a new employee was still project managing entire games. I was still designing and had huge input, and I was leading the writing of the narrative of the games and coming up with all of that. So I felt like, because of the fact that the games industry is so small, when women step up and apply for these positions and get accepted for these positions because they're more valued than they previously were, already just entry-level positions give you a huge amount of sway and the ability to move up in our industry, I feel like.
It does seem like, just from my basic observation, that there are more women in leadership roles, behind the scenes roles, than there are necessarily in the design spotlight roles. And of course that's changing, but it seems like that the behind the scenes, the development roles, and the presidential, company leadership roles are leading the design positions, at least right now.
Yeah.
Someone, I lost it. Where it scrolled away. Kabuki asks, what is the oldest game you still love?
Huh. I don't know why this is the first thing that pops into my head, and I don't remember what the new name is, but I was just the other day thinking about Dragon's Delta. What is it called now? It got reprinted.
It did. Dragon Delta and River Dragons. No, is that right? Dragon Delta know. Was the one about the
building a bridge across the river.
Yeah, it's River Dragons is the new version.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that with a friend of mine because we were at a park and there was a zigzaggy bridge. That game was amazing, and I used to play it when I was a little kid. I don't know if it's necessarily that old, but it feels old to me because I used to play it.
I think Dragon Delta was like Euro games. It was like early 2000s, 2001 or so. So yeah, it's a pretty old one. I think for me it might be Acquire. That one's pretty old, and I still enjoy it. It hasn't hit the table as much. I'm of course tempted to throw Merchant of Venus out there, but that's only like mid 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's got to be Acquire. Let's see. Everybody's talking about Stratego and Twilight Imperium, the old games that they play in the chat. 2000 is.
I don't think I've ever actually played Stratego.
Really?
I've seen it set up, but I don't think I've ever played it.
I was never a huge fan of it until I picked up the Star Wars version, which has some extra rules about Han Solo can shoot things and stuff like that, which I thought was interesting. But thinking back, that one also hasn't hit the table in a long time. What activity or entertainment do you enjoy to escape board gaming? When it's been a long day at work, you're like, I can't look at another board game. What do you do otherwise?
Yeah, I do a lot of writing, creative writing.
Okay.
Which sometimes also isn't an escape because, as I said, I do a lot of writing for board games. But I like doing writing that isn't about board games or takes place in the world of board games. I listen to podcasts, watch TV, all the normal stuff.
What genres do you like to write in?
Horror.
Horror?
Yeah.
Okay.
My writing is very weird, very on the grotesque spectrum of horror.
Okay.
Like monstrosities and stuff.
All right. So more the icky horror than the suspense horror.
Yeah, the icky horror.
Okay. All right. I will not be reading any of that.
That is, I respect that.
Somebody in the chat, Jeffrey Engelstein.
Oh, who's that?
Popped up to say that Sydney was a huge Rat-a-tat-cat fan back in the day.
I love Rat-a-tat-cat. Did that get reprinted under a new name too? I feel like it did.
That I don't know. I feel like I've got Rat-a-tat. I think my kids have Rat-a-tat-cat.
It's a fantastic game. It 100% holds up.
Okay. That's
I
not
stand
one.
by that.
Excellent. So what does the development cycle timeline look like? I know that every game is a little bit different, and sometimes one just shows up that's practically ready and you just print it. And then other times you have to, do some more cycling. But what, just on average, what sort of is the timeline between the first time you see a design to debut at a convention or on the marketplace?
I would say probably a year and a half to 2 years, depending on the game, but also depending on the other games we currently have in production, because we like to, group our games together so that a lot of them go into production at a similar time, maybe around a convention.
Right.
And also it makes it cheaper to ship them all in the same pallets. But also, some of our bigger games like Aeon's End or like Terraforming Mars that we know we're going to have a large Kickstarter, we don't want to release another game, at the same time. We stagger out all of our big releases. So if we have a year like this one that we have a lot of games coming from internal design, then all the games we signed from independent publishers are sort of pushed backwards in the cycle, and then they'll be gotten to, after that, even if the development of them from, in terms of polishing is done sooner, just in terms of timing windows with the rest of the games around them so that we don't release things too close together. But probably for the actual, we sign it from a designer and we start fixing it up through playtesting is maybe a year or 6 or 7 months to a year.
Okay. Can you think of an example that the game just went super smoothly and there was a perfect market position for it and it just, you shot it out there immediately?
So I've only been at the company for a year and 3/4. It'll be 2 years in November.
Okay.
And in the game cycle, that is not actually that many games that I've seen come out, because I've been project manager for 4 or 5 projects, and each of those has been a year or a quarter of a year in the managing of. We do, especially on the Stronghold side, a lot of licensed games that were already published overseas that we licensed to republish in America. So those are a lot faster down the pipeline. Generally, anything we get from a designer that I've seen so far in my tenure here tends to take quite a number of months before it really gets going.
Carson wants to talk more about horror and is asking your favorite horror movie.
My favorite horror movie? Well, that's tricky because I actually don't like horror movies.
Okay. No, that's interesting because, so you're preferring the imagination of text versus a horror movie.
Well, my problem is jump scares get me very badly. And my reaction, this is a fun fact about me, my reaction to being scared is actually fainting, actually to the ground.
Oh, no.
I've scraped quite a few knees. So I don't like horror movies, because they usually are super reliant on jump scares.
Sure.
I like psychological horror movies where it's more about the atmosphere, but books and written horror, they don't have jump scares. I can sort of consume it on my own terms and just appreciate intellectually, oh yes, that is horrifying. How interesting. What a cool turn of phrase, rather than being having to hide under my blankets for a few hours.
Okay. Oh, you want a slower scare. You want the slow burn. Interesting. Yeah. That's fascinating. Kabuki Kid asks about video games. Any current favorites or all-time favorites in the video game world?
Well, I used to be really into League of Legends. Spend all my time playing League of Legends and watching professional League of Legends up until about 4 years ago when I quit cold turkey.
Okay.
Because it was just taking up a really long amount of time. So I was like, I can't watch every single professional League of Legends game that gets played because that they're each an hour and there's like 6 a week, and I'm watching three different, I'm watching the Asian leagues and I'm watching the European leagues and I'm watching the North American. I was like, I'm not getting anything done. So I stopped watching that, and I haven't really gotten into a video game in the same way since I stopped my League of Legends obsession.
That's impressive, and I need you to talk to my son about Minecraft videos because I don't know how to stop that.
Well, I was briefly getting paid for it was sort of the reason, because I had a short job in college where I was writing recaps of professional League of Legends games for use in like fantasy leagues. So it was a website that did fantasy sports. And so I would write about each of the players and their stat lines and how they did and if they were like going to do well in the fantasy leagues. But it just meant watching a ton of League of Legends and writing about it on a very short time scale. So it became super stressful instead of fun and relaxing.
Okay. Yes. I can totally understand that. Elena asks, did you already talk about your background? We sort of jumped over it. Do you want to go back and talk about maybe some influential games that you remember growing up with?
Yeah, so I can't think of any influential games specifically, but I grew up going to a lot of conventions, like from the time when I was, 1, 2, little tiny baby before I could remember the fact that I was going to conventions, and getting to be around so many people, who love board games, and just walking up to tables, playing a board game I'd never played before and sitting down and learning it with a bunch of strangers when I probably should not have been allowed to be by myself, but it was always so safe and welcoming. This is a call out for my dad who's in the chat, who would just set me loose in a large open gaming hall. But yeah, I mean, it always just was sort of a place that I felt comfortable in and people I felt comfortable with. And so when I started designing board games with my brother and my dad, it was just kind of something that I felt like I'd always been a part of it, and I'd always been thinking in terms of games and thinking in terms of how games work and their strategies and their mechanics. So it was never for me like a conscious decision of, I really want to design games. It was more I had the opportunity to be around games more, and I'd always loved being around games so much that I just wanted to keep doing it.
Do you remember, this is a question from Gator Dave, what the first board game you beat your dad at was?
And you could ask my dad. He's in the chat. I don't know. He never let me win. But he would No, so he didn't do the thing where you let your kids win.
Right.
But he did do a thing where he let us come close to winning.
And then pull the rug out from under you?
Yeah. I think it was sort of a lesson in not giving up, because if you got totally trashed, then you would think, oh, I can't possibly win. But if you got close to winning, you would think you could win. But of course, he still took the joy in beating children. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was early on,
Yeah.
He wasn't beating us for long.
I don't doubt it. Were there any, I lost this got scrolled off the board again, but life experiences that have bled into your designs? Coralu asked this. Any good stories of vacations or things that you read making an impact on the games that you've designed?
I mean, I think that especially the games I designed with my family, they're very influenced by how my family is as people and how we interact with each other, We always say when people ask, when you design with your dad and your brother and you, do you fall into certain roles? And I always say my brother wants to make it incredibly difficult on the player. So the player is always struggling and having a hard time. And I want to make it very nice to the players, so it's super enjoyable and like light experience. And then my dad sort of balances the two so that it's just the right amounts of mean to the players. And I think that sort of family dynamic of the push and the pull and doing so much design while we were, driving in cars together or stuck in the house and just kind of half design, half bickering, which I think shows through, especially in Space Cadets, which I see you have there behind you,
what?
which is bickering the board game, basically.
I don't know how that got there.
What? No, you just keep your setup like that all the time, right? Those games are always there.
They're always there. This is just where I work, and I like to keep them nearby.
Because they're your favorites.
Do you have a favorite age range or player count that you like to develop for?
I like to do, like the 2 to 4 range. I even though I have designed a lot of games that take, 6, 7, 8, I think it's a lot harder to design a game that still feels really fun at those high player counts, because for me, my design aesthetic is more geared away from heavy Euros, turn-taking, decision-making, and more into fast-paced, simultaneous action, lots of player discussion, and staying connected with the game the entire time in different ways. And so the more players you have, the more difficult it is to keep high player interaction throughout the entire game and throughout the entire design, without it being something like Dice Duel, where it's actually a team-on-team, real-time. That's obviously different than your average 8-player, 6-player game. So when you have the 2 to 4-player range, you have that real, intensity of constantly being engaged with the game and discussion and stuff like that, which I think is the best part of games.
I'm smiling because your dad types, "Your mother wants to know if you have a mother."
Yes. She just, was not as into board games as my dad was. I can tell you the first board game I beat my mom at.
Okay.
It's Rat-a-Tat-Cat.
There you go. You're a Rat-a-Tat-Cat shark, apparently.
Yeah. Well, she would pretend to let us win, but she usually just wasn't 100% clear on the rules.
Still, it's a win. You're going to take it.
No. My mom is great, and she's great at board games.
I have played with both your mom and dad, and I think she may have beat me. Both of them beat me in one of the last games I played with them. So she's just fine. Kabuki Kid asks, have you been reading anything recently for pleasure? Anything special you want to mention?
The book I just finished recently was Wayward Son by Rainbow Rowell, which is a sequel to Carry On by Rainbow Rowell, which is a great series of books if you haven't read it. It's sort of like a parody of Harry Potter.
Okay.
It's like a meta genre, which I'm going to go off on a little, I'm a writer and I find this so interesting tangent, so feel free to cut me off.
No, go for it.
It uses Harry Potter in a really interesting way because it's sort of supposed to be a fan fiction of a series that doesn't actually exist. But it uses the fact that the cultural consciousness of what Harry Potter is and how the boy wizard storyline works, that it can jump you straight to talking about a series that you've never read. And you still understand, the book picks up and it's like, I'm going to my last year. Remember those adventures I had? And you didn't read them, but you can understand, this character is the Dumbledore archetype, and this character is the Draco archetype. And just, we live in this world where even if you haven't read Harry Potter, you understand so much of these moving pieces that it doesn't need to retell all of that storyline. It can jump to a storyline that's already built on top of those foundations and twisting them and using them in its own new ways, you expect this, but it gives you this instead. Without having to previously build up the fact that you should expect this before the twist, because you come into the book expecting this. because of this cultural consciousness of what that kind of story uses, which is just so cool.
That sounds fascinating. It's sort of this meta, you don't have to do the work because you already know the zeitgeist of it. And
Yeah.
that's neat. All right, now you said that was sort of a genre. Are there other books that do that as well?
I'm not sure. I was thinking about it because this is like a rant I've gone on about other types of things, like other mediums that can use cultural zeitgeist as a diving board, a jumping off point in order to create new kinds of stories because they don't have to do the initial legwork.
Steve asks, do you prefer physical cons much more than virtual ones? And I know a question came by earlier that what's the thing you miss the most about a physical con?
I mean, I don't know how much of this is just the I've been quarantined brain talking. I miss traveling and going new places. It's really nice to get to spend some time in a different city and try all the different restaurants and walk around and see different people and just feel like you're doing something new, even if you're working at it, and maybe your time to play board games is slightly more limited. It still always felt like a breath of fresh air in terms of my day-to-day, routine. It was something really cool and fun and special.
Yeah. Even when it was somewhere that, you've been to 5 or 6 times, that first arrival day when it's like, the convention is just starting to get bustling and you're setting up and you got work to do, but it's also exciting. Everything's in front of you.
I do have to say I'm a dice collector, and so I have bought so many fewer dice this year than in most years, which I guess I should be grateful for, like, wallet-wise, but it's disappointing.
Yeah, I've been saying that I've made so many fewer impulse purchases. Usually at conventions you walk by something or something is the hot game, and even if I wasn't interested in it when I arrived, it becomes the thing I must own. And they often end up being, I believe, actually, your dad has called it the ill-advised purchase. The ill-advised miniatures purchase, I think, is what the tradition is.
Every year at GenCon, they would purchase way too much stuff for a new miniatures game and never play it.
Yep.
That was part of the tradition, is that they never play it.
That's a great tradition. But I would often come home with, a good portion of my suitcase full of games that I did not know existed until I got there. Occasionally you find something great, but on more occasions than not, it's something that ends up leaving the collection pretty quickly. And that hasn't happened nearly as much this year.
I miss it.
I miss it. I do miss it. I want to try out those weird things that I never heard about until I arrived at the convention. And that's just not really happening right now. Elena asks, did you get your degree in creative writing, or is that just a side hobby?
I did not. I went to Kenyon College, which is known for its creative writing program, and I went there specifically because it was known for its creative writing program, but I didn't actually major in it. I just took a lot of courses. I majored in anthropology with a minor in Japanese, and I attempted to make my anthropology degree a little bit board game focused. I did some independent studies on the history of, women in board gaming cultural spaces and stuff like that, board games in anthropological studies, but it was more of a general degree because it was a very small college and they did not have anything more specific than an anthropology degree.
What led you to study Japanese?
Anime? No, I mean, I was really into anime when I was, in middle school and high school. And so I had kind of decided then, like way back when I was 12, I was like, I need to learn a language probably in college. I'll do Japanese and then I'll study abroad in Japan and it'll be awesome. And I just kind of carried that with me even when I was slightly less interested in anime. And so I made sure to go to a college with a Japanese program. And when I started learning it, I loved learning the language, and I decided to minor because I just kept taking like Japanese culture courses for fun. So I was like, I might as well do a minor. And I did get to study abroad in Japan for 4 months.
Oh,
So
excellent.
it was so great. I would love to go back there at some point.
Where were you for the 4 months?
I was studying in Tokyo, but my actual study, um, I can't think of the word. The house where I lived with the woman who
Your
was
homestay?
my thank you. My homestay was in Saitama. So I had a 3-hour train trip every day at like
Whoa.
7 a.m. into school. But
Wow.
I miss it anyway. And Japanese trains are so packed in tight. At the very beginning, before I learned better, I would try and go to the end where you can hold on to the things near the seats. But everybody presses in behind you so much, your feet get lifted off the ground. I was like dangling from my arm,
Oh, no.
and I nearly passed out. So, hot tip, if you ever go to Tokyo, you're on the trains, you actually do want to stay near the middle, even though everyone's pressing around on you. At least you're stable.
Okay. That is,
Yeah.
I did not know that tip. I've been to Japan a few times, but well, I didn't pass out for one thing.
Yeah. Well, rush hour is not generally when tourists are taking the trains, that early in the morning into Tokyo from Saitama. So,
One of the best trips that I ever took in Japan, my sister was teaching English for a year with the JET program. And when we went to visit, got the JR Rail Pass, which I think is the most awesome thing as a concept. You pay, it's expensive. It is not an inexpensive thing to get, but it is basically a free pass for any of the trains in the country. Yeah. And you can just decide, you know what, I'd love to go to Kyoto. And you go to a little ticket window and say, here's my pass, I want to go to Kyoto. And they're like, here you go. And it's on the bullet train, and it's like the nicest trip. And you just, here's where I want to go. It was so cool.
It's great. Also, when I was in Japan, I had a commuter's pass, which means I said where I lived and I said where I went to school. It also works for your business. And they're like, okay, so these are the trains you take between there. So you can pay monthly to take that route as much as you want. So it's free to go from home to there. But every single stop along the way is also free all the time because you have this commuter's pass. So the farther away you live from school, which, as you may remember from 3 seconds ago, I live very far away.
Yes.
I could go to all of those places for free, So that was
cool.
really, really cool.
That is really cool. I mean, what was between where you were living in Tokyo?
My favorite place was Ikebukuro, which is one of the major sort of city areas of Tokyo. It's got a huge mall called the Sunshine City Mall, and it had an entire aquarium in it and an amusement park. Japan is amazing.
Japan is amazing. We could geek out about Japan for a while, but we can continue doing it because I'm seeing just Chad is just talking about Japan now.
Okay. Another Japanese hot tip.
Okay.
So, this is going to sound crazy. You're going to think I'm crazy. But if you go to Japan, especially Tokyo, eat Indian food.
What?
Japanese Indian food is the greatest thing I've ever had in my entire life. I miss it every day. If I had to eat one food for the rest of my entire life, it would be Japanese Indian food.
Okay, so is it I have to unpack this. Is it the Indian dishes that we would recognize at an Indian restaurant here in the States, just
mostly
with a twist?
It's not even really twisted. I don't know if they just use different spices or because of the cultural drift, they got a kind of different vibe of what Indian food is, but it's also just so all the Indian places, that I went to, there's probably fancy ones, but they're very much like fast food. You see the signs out on the street, and they're like these tiny little places, and you can pay $4 and get all you can eat, like a bowl of curry and a huge thing of naan and rice, and it's just really warm and good. And like I said, I really cannot tell you why it's different than American Indian food, except being way cheaper. But it is and it's amazing. And it's everywhere in Japan. It's really, really popular.
Well, I have an idea. If you want to go back to Japan, you are now in a position where you could perhaps visit the Tokyo Game Market to
Yeah.
scout some new designs. Of course, we need to be able to travel again. But is that a goal, visiting the Tokyo Game Market?
I actually,
You've been
when
there
I was
already?
studying abroad in Japan, I lobbied Stephen Bonacore to pay a pass for me to go to the Tokyo Game Fair because I happened to be living in Japan while it was happening. So I was like, this is the cheapest person at a Tokyo Game Fair you will ever get because
Yeah.
I have room, I have board, I have transportation. I
And you
just
have a
need
train
a
pass.
pass. Also, I speak Japanese, so I got to go while I was in Japan. It was really cool. It was gigantic. It was very different than our conventions because the booths were not really full booths. From what I can remember, a lot of people were just kind of there with their own game, pitching it. Like the
Okay.
designer was there with their game. Some people had larger booths, but there were a lot of people who were kind of very, clearly working entirely on their own, publishing their own games or pitching their own designs. And I got to talk to a lot of cool people and look at a lot of cool games and get prototypes to send back to Bonacore. He did not publish any of them, but one of them was Tokyo Highway, which I
Okay.
I hold that he probably should have. I don't know. I don't remember the specifics. A lot of the rule books I got were entirely in Japanese, so I don't know how much he could have done with them.
Right.
Some of
Did you
these.
have to send back translations as well and
Yeah, I
give him a
mean, I could give him the gist. I was like, here's how you play this game because it was explained to me, but I don't think I could translate this entire rule book for
right.
you. So
So
that's pretty cool.
how well have you kept up with the Japanese? Are you still able to read and follow along a conversation?
I could probably follow along a simple conversation, and I'm sure if I started, you know, reviewing, it's all in there somewhere. It'd be easier to relearn, but I definitely have not been keeping up the way that I should. I have lost a lot of fluency since the time that I lived there.
Yes.
But when the world exists again, I've been looking for like local Japanese programs and like classes to take, so I want to get
Excellent.
back in it.
And get back to the Tokyo game market because
Yes.
it seems like you got to find one hit there, and then it becomes worth it, and you have to go every year.
And then they have to send me every year. I get to eat all the Indian food I want.
Cora Lou asks, "Are there any games you wanted to publish in the past that were vetoed that you might look at again now that you're in charge?"
Well, I'm not, the be all end all. And I work really closely with Nick Little. We're kind of the acquisitions team between the two of us. And we have pretty similar opinions on games, which I don't know if that makes us a really good team because we tend to be on the same wavelength without even talking about it when we're meeting with a designer face to face, or maybe it's a little bit of a detriment because we know exactly the kind of game we want and we don't have diversity of interest. But there are games that I have been pitched that I was like, listen, this is a really cool concept. Make X, Y, and Z change, and please come back to us with it. So there's definitely games out there that we are keeping an eye on that we were like, this is almost something we don't have the resources to devote development time to it. If you do the development work that we're interested in, then we would be interested in publishing it.
Okay, interesting. Is there a particular direction that you want to start searching for games that maybe you haven't been going in that direction before? Again, once the world opens up and you
Once the
can.
world exists, yeah. I I'm not sure. I think that we have a really strong basis with the types of games that we produce with the high player interaction and pretty light playing under an hour sort of things is really still what we're looking for. But the world of board games only gets more and more and more saturated with new releases. And so the number one thing we're always kind of looking for is something that does something unique that we've never seen before, something that sparks the imagination. And it feels really bad for me to say that because I know it's incredibly hard to be actionable of just
Yes.
make something
Just
new.
make something new. Be creative.
But it really is more important than ever. There's so many games that I play, that get pitched to me that I have to go back with. Your game is good and it's fun, but it's just not good enough. There's just so many games out there and there's so much competition that every single one of them needs to be able to pierce through the noise.
Yeah.
And even the ones that we think will pierce through the noise a lot of times don't. So there's so much risk that goes into signing a board game. So the more just shiny and exciting and new that it can be, we would stretch outside of our boundaries for something like that really looks like it's going to make a splash, make some noise, and get people to notice it.
Kabuki Kid asks, considering the current state of things, is a solo mode a near mandatory mode to have in a new pitch right now?
It doesn't hurt to have in a pitch. I definitely don't. Having one does not inspire a lot of excitement in me personally, and I would be excited about a game that didn't have one. We publish a lot of games that don't have them. People like them, but I think there are a lot of vocal people like them, but there are a lot of people who will play board games that don't have solo variants, and there are a lot of people who would play both versions, a solo version and a non-solo version, but we'll still play the non-solo version if that's all that there is. And so I don't think you should bend over backwards to take a good game and try and shove it into a small box just for the sake of giving it a single player variant. If your game lends itself to single player, that's great, but I have had people be like, can you make a solo player variant of this game? And I'm like, if I did, I lose the soul of it. This game is not designed to be played by itself. The whole point of it is the push and pull between different players, and it's not going to be fun. And we don't want to produce games that aren't fun, even if that's a marketable thing to say you have a solo player variant.
I like that phrase that changing it in that way would lose the soul of the game. Because that makes sense. If a solo mode flows naturally, that's great, but don't force it. And I guess the extension of that question is, where do you stand on the expansion of player count? So if somebody comes to you with a 2 to 4 player game, you're like, oh man, we really would love to have a 5 or a 6 player in our catalog. Could you maybe add another player to this whole thing?
I can't think of a time that we've done that, or I can't think of a scenario in which we'd really want to do that. But yeah, I mean, if the game can be stretched in that way, then there's nothing wrong with making it into a 2 to 6 player game. If 2 to 4 and 2 to 6 play the same way, why not make it more inclusive? But there's a lot of games that they change entirely in order to add those extra players on. Like here, it was a competitive game, and then the extra player is a 1 versus many, and I'm like, whoa, slow down. What? You've now pitched me 2 games, and one of them is inevitably going to be better than the other one. So why aren't we just making that game that's better than the other one? So that's my feelings. But I don't know. I mean, sometimes you have to bow to marketing pressure, which is stuff that my coworkers tell me and then I force myself to do. I'm a game idealist.
Okay. Are there somebody asked, what is the next big thing? Next big thing in board gaming, like Legacy, Roll and Write, Bees. What is it? Because you obviously know.
Oh yeah, I know. It's I don't know. I do think that I think that with the greater it's getting on towards 10 and I've forgotten all the words. Influx of people into the industry, that games that are really accessible for new players, something light is going to continue to be things that people are looking for. Just light and fun and accessible, simpler rule sets, simpler mechanics, really clean types of games. I think those are almost always going to be something people are interested in buying, especially once game stores open back up, because a lot of people who go into those, are new to the game playing experience, and they don't want something really overly complicated.
Yeah. I think anything that brings a new segment of audience into the hobby is good. Sometimes that gets derided by the diehard hobbyists, but more gamers is better. More people is more perspectives and more customers that can lead to other things. I think it's great. So accessibility is certainly good.
Aside from the whole solo player craze, you can't play board games alone.
Yeah.
And board games are not meant to be played alone. They're a social experience, and that's what is so great about them, is that they're a pointedly social experience. And a lot of times a board game isn't even about the board game you're playing. It's about the experience that board game creates amongst people. And you need people to have that experience.
Yes.
So the more people, the better.
Absolutely. So, I think we should probably, as you said, we're getting a little late. I wanted to wrap up with some stuff that we were talking about before we got on, and that is how Stronghold is dealing with the release, the big convention release schedule. What are you planning for the virtual GenCon and the end of year stuff? And how are you still making that an event, even though we're not physically going to be in those locations?
Yeah, so we have a really big GenCon release bundle that we're going to be having sort of a super sale on right around when GenCon was supposed to be, when virtual GenCon is. And it's going to include a lot of our releases that were supposed to come out not just at GenCon, but also at Origins and other conventions that everything got kind of backlogged. And now we just have a ton of new games, so we decided to release them in a bundle sale, and you can get 5 of our new games for as low as $60 plus shipping, and these are all mainline games that, like the new Aeon's End is in it, all the new Roll-In Rights are in it, the second Sherlock Files game, one that I project managed, Coldest Night, which does have a solo player variant, and is a cooperative game about surviving a blizzard, and the new Kodama game. Just all of these games, you can mix and match your own bundle of 5 games, get them for as low as $60, and that's going to be going up at around GenCon time. So we're really excited to get these games out, because a lot of them, these are projects we were working on and hoping would come out a little sooner before everything kind of happened.
It does feel like there's this backlog, and now the floodgates are going to open, and we're going to be faced with a bunch of things all at once.
Yeah, so we figure, if you're interested in all these games that we're so excited are coming out, it's even easier to get a whole bunch of them for like fraction of the price that they would be individually. And you can look for more details about the GenCon bundle sale as we get a little bit closer to GenCon itself. We'll be putting up some information about that.
Awesome. Well, Sydney, thank you so much for talking with me. I hope you had a great time. And chat, thank you for joining us as well.
I had a really good time. Thank you so much for having me.
And it's great to catch up.
And what else am I doing with my evenings? I can't go out.
You could be playing solo games. I hear it's the hot thing.
I have some on my shelf.
Well, there you go.
I could be playing them.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and I'll see you on another Daily Chat, and also for Dice Tower tonight, next Wednesday. Crystal and I do silly things. But until then, I'm Eric Summerer saying thanks for watching The Dice Tower.